Hello, we're going to talk about spring scales. In your science lab, you probably have all three of these spring scales, and we're going to talk about what they're used for, how to use them, and the scale that is on them. So first of all, spring scales are used to measure force, and you can measure this in two ways. It could be the force when you pull something along a surface, or it could be the force of gravity when you hang something from it. So before we should look at the two ways you can use this with your students, let's take a look at the scales and the types of spring scales that you have in your science lab. So you may have these metal spring scales which are a little bit older, and you'll notice that sometimes on those the scales are in grams and ounces. We want to avoid using these unless they have an N on them on the scale for Newton. That's really what we're looking at in elementary, is looking how to measure force in Newton. So if you have one that doesn't have Newtons, I would say probably avoid that and maybe use these. You'll notice too that this side has Newtons on it, and then you'll see that there's different scales depending on the mass of your object that you're going to be measuring. And so you can vary that up depending on what you're going to use. If you flip the spring scale over, you'll notice that there's gram on the other side. That's a way that you can actually measure mass, but it's not very accurate, so we're going to avoid using the side with the grams. Okay, so let's take a look at how we would use a spring scale in the classroom. So the first way that you can use a spring scale is by taking the hook that's on the end and attaching it to a particular object. And what we're going to do is we're going to pull this object across the surface, and we're going to see how much force it takes for us to move it from one place to another. So as I drag this across the top of the desk, I can start to measure, and that's 1.5 newtons. I can add more mass to it, start it again, and predict what will happen to the force. And of course, we're going to need more force to move more mass. So we can see that this is no longer a scale that works for us because we bottomed it out. So we'll have to move to the other one. Alternatively, adding mass to it and measuring is one way that you can look at how to use the spring scale. You can also look at how much force it takes by changing the surface that you pull it over and looking at what that does to the force that it takes, so bringing in friction a little bit. The other way that you can use a spring scale is by hanging it or holding it and hanging something on it to see how much force of gravity it is pulling on the particular object. So here we are weighing it because when you weigh something, you're measuring the force of gravity. So the force of gravity in newtons is just a little bit over 0.5. So I hope this tutorial has helped you become comfortable with our friends, the spring scale. Thank you so much, and happy sciencing.